Welcome to Earth, a Love Story. I'm your host, Robin Lassiter. This week on the podcast, we welcome Mike Clelland. Mike is the author of several books, including The Messengers, Hidden Experience, and his newest book and first fiction novel, The Unseen. The Unseen is a fast-paced paranormal thriller which taps into real-life experiences from Mike's extensive research into the mythic role of the owl, synchronicities, and supernatural contact. You can find Mike at his website hiddenexperience.blogspot.com, which explores these events and their connection to the alien contact phenomenon. It also features extended audio interviews with visionaries and experts examining the complexities of the overall UFO experience. Mike reached out to me early in my experiencer coming out days and has been a kind and generous friend, providing incredible support and work as I navigate publishing my own book. He's just a really great guy, and I hope you enjoy our conversation.
The only way to really tell this from the beginning would be to talk about the event in 2006. And at the time, I was 44 years old, and I was living in Idaho, and I was working for an outdoor school. And I've told this story many times, but I apologize. I totally go on autopilot for this talk. I've been doing a lot of podcasts and telling this story. I've told this story hundreds of times, but I'll try to give you some deeper insights, I guess, than the surface story, which is what I have been telling. So I was spending a lot of time in Alaska, and I kind of knew that this was kind of at the tail end of my time with the school. I had been there for probably 15 years at that point and teaching outdoor stuff and big ambitious trips, oftentimes 30 days long, a couple times a summer. I was doing some other stuff where I was training the instructors, like an internal training program, so for mountaineering and backcountry skiing and stuff like that. So I had spent the summer in Alaska, and I was back down in the lower 48, back home in Idaho, and there's a branch of the school right there in the town I live in. So I went into the town, and I got in a conversation with this woman who worked in town at the school. She was doing the gear. She would help issue the backpacks and the sleeping bags to the students that came into the branch there, what's called the Teton branch. The Teton Valley branch. So it was September, might have been early October, but I think it was September. And I was like, hey, you've been here all summer long in the Tetons, right on for you. Tetons and Yellowstones right in your backyard. You must have been camping all summer long. You probably really got after it and ran out there and it's so good to have such beautiful camping right in the backyard. She said, I didn't camp once. I was like, that's terrible. I'll take you camping. So this was sort of like a first date. And so the plan was just to go for one night and then to go without a tent. This weather was beautiful. And I've since, that was before the book was published, but I have since published a book on ultralight backpacking. I had actually done illustrations for another book, but I got to be kind of turned into kind of a thing for me. So I would work for the school doing really, really, really heavy trips, winter camping in Alaska with wet ropes. Wow, it was brutal. And then I would come down to the lower 48 and I would do these super, super lightweight trips into the Tetons for just a night or two. So we went with almost nothing at all. And I was pretty good at okay, we're going to leave this behind. We're going to leave this behind. We're going to take this. And so it doesn't take very long to get deep, deep, deep into the mountains with a light pack. We just had running shoes on. And so as the sun was setting, we were in this incredibly beautiful spot, high in the mountains. And the sun was setting, and I was making dinner on a big flat rock. And I was totally in my element. I'd been working all summer, and this was just I was completely at peace, in my element. This is where I wanted to be. And I could tell she was kind of overwhelmed, wow, this is incredible. So we were sitting together having this conversation as the sun was setting, and she was talking about something, and it really struck me. That she was sharing something at a level that really surprised me. Like, wow, this woman's much smarter. This woman has a much more depth than I expected. And at that moment, an owl flew over. And then a second owl, and then a third owl. And for the next, I'm going to say like 2 hours, these 3 owls flew around us. And they would land on the branches of the trees near us, and they would swoop past us. And so we're in bear country. So after we finished making dinner, sun was twilight and stuff. We just put everything away in our little packs, and we walked another, just a ways on the trail until we found a nice spot to camp. And so we were well above tree line. And so we were just in this big, wide, open meadow of wildflowers. And so we set the sleeping pads down and laid out under the stars. And this is high elevation in the northern Rockies, way, way far away. This is something you understand, but not many people do. Like seeing the night sky, like really seeing the night sky, like seeing the Milky Way. People used to visit me, and they say, well, it was clear when we went, like just a little while ago. Now there's clouds in the sky. And I would go, that's the Milky Way. Those aren't clouds. And they were like, really? Like you've never, like to talk to an adult who has never seen the Milky Way was just like, so anyway, just a million, billion, trillion stars. And these owls we were lying on our backs looking straight up at the sky, and the owls would fly right over our faces. And just for half a second, whoosh, there'd be like it'd be inky black. And now owls don't make any sound, so it was really eerie. You could feel them going by, but you couldn't hear them. And the next morning we were like, wow, that was cool. That owl thing was really cool. And I said, hey, let's do this again. She said, I would love to. So 4 days later, I called her up and said, let's go camping again. Went to a different part of the mountains, and it was colder at this point. So we went to a totally different part of the mountains. And then there was a hilltop, and because it was cold, when I brought a tent this time. So instead of like just to warm up rather than stepping in the tent cold, I said, let's walk up to the top of that hill and watch the sunset, and then we can climb in the tent. And so we got to the top of this hill, and just as the sun was setting, same thing happened. 3 owls flew around us. And to have it happen once was pretty cool. To have it happen twice with the same person 4 days later was positively mystical. And I remember this owl landed at our feet. And I just and it was what's called a short-eared owl. They're like 10 inches tall. They're cute, and they're just so I'll come back to this in a little bit, but they were short-eared owls. And I remember the look on her face, just this look of astonishment, just, and I gave a talk a couple years ago in Michigan, and her name is Kristen, and Kristen now lives in Michigan. She grew up in Michigan. She's back in Michigan, and she came to my talk. And we've been pretty close over the last bunch of years. And so we talk on the phone every once in a while, and we've been in touch. And so it was really fun to have her in the audience, because I stand on stage and I tell this story, and I can be pretty animated when I talk, and I've got visuals and pictures. And so I'd say, Kristen, how am I doing? Is this right? Am I telling this story okay? And she said, you're doing great. You're doing great. And so that felt really, because I tell this story so many times. Has it turned into is it still attached to the real event? And I really sat with her afterwards, and I don't want to stretch this story. I don't want to embellish this story. She said, no, it's very accurate. So 3 owls flew around us for about a half hour, and they were close this second time. And what I'm talking about now, but I did not talk about then, was that I had a voice in my head when I saw these owls. Both nights, I was looking at real owls, and I had a voice in my head that said, this has something to do with UFOs. And I recognized the importance of that. Now, what was happening at that point in my life, I was 44 years old, and then leading, like in my youth and throughout, I guess there was one event when I was 30. So in my youth, I had a missing time event. I had a close-up UFO sighting. It seemed close. It was either kind of smallish and close, or if it was really big and far away, but it felt like it was about the size of a van and fairly close in the nighttime sky. And then I had a missing time event with a associated bright orange flash in the sky when I was 12, also when I was 12. And then, it's interesting that the close-up UFO sighting was in Northville, Michigan. And I grew up in Southfield, Michigan, but there's a town called Northville. It wasn't too far from me. And that is where Kristen was born and raised, in Northville. So I had a UFO sighting in the town where she was born. Now, or where she grew up anyway. Now, so those events. I also had another event where I was 30, and I was living alone in a house in Maine. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and there was a bright light shining through the window. And I sat up on my elbow and looked out the window, and there were 5 gray aliens, the gray beings with the big black eyes and the bald heads, 5 of them walking towards the house. I was the only one in the house, and I should have freaked out, but I didn't. I heard a voice in my head that said, "Oh yes, they're here. Now is the time to put your head on the pillow and black out." Well, I think it was, now is the time to put your head on the pillow and shut down. And that's exactly what I did. I set my head on the pillow and poof, went out. Calm as can be. That the visual I had was scary. My reaction was empty, void, sucked dry of any emotion. And then the next morning I dismissed it all as a dream, and I never even went out to look and see if there were footprints in the snow. But wow, now looking back on it, that's 30 years later. Wow, yeah, 30 years. 1993. I feel strongly something happened that night. So these events were in my catalog of life experiences, and at the same time I was reading UFO books, and I would read these UFO books, often abduction books, and I would tap so strongly into the experiencer's life. And I would say, I've got this funny experience in my life, but no way, I'm not going there. I am not going to deal with this. But at the same time, I'd read another book, and I'd go, I had that experience, but no way. I'm not going there. I'm not going to even address this. I'm not going to contemplate it. I'm not going to. And I could tell these stories, the UFO sighting stories. I could tell them around a campfire or around a dinner table. I could say, wow, isn't that interesting? Wonder what it means. And I would never, ever take that next step. So after the event in the mountains with Kristen, I reached out to a couple of UFO. Leo Sprinkle was living in Wyoming. I reached out to Leo. He's since passed. And he was wonderful. And he would say, oh, well, here's a person you should talk to. He would give me a phone number of someone, and I would talk to that person. So I had the owl experience co-joined with a voice in my head that said, this has something to do with UFOs. And then so they were kind of married together in my mind. So when I talked to people who had the UFO experience, I'd say, have you ever had any odd experiences with owls? And people would go, oh, that's weird that you asked that, because I have the strangest story. Nobody asked me that. Wow, I have a weird story about an owl. And I said, let me hear it. And I started collecting these stories and archiving them and cataloging them, and I put them on a blog in 2009, I started a blog. And it was mostly, initially, the genesis was just going to be synchronicities, which I've had a lot of. And I put that story I told with Kristen was on the first couple of days of the blog. And so after I wrote it up, I had it written up as a diary entry. I just cut and pasted it and put it in the blog. And I did not mention the owl thing, the voice in my head, as far as the UFO thing. And when it was posted, I contacted Kristen. It was up on the blog. So it was up and posted in 2009. Kristen had long since moved out of the valley where we were living, or where she was living at the time. And I contacted her and I said, hey, I got to ask, what were we talking about the very first night when we saw the very first set of owls? I remember we were talking about something, and you were talking, and I was impressed. And she said, oh, I remember exactly what I was talking about. I was giving my most heartfelt definition of what God means to me. So now, so I'm not at all churchy, right? So I kind of bristle at the term God in a lot of contexts, but I certainly recognize the mythic power of that word at that moment. And so I was already, so after the owl thing happened, I just was on fire with like owls. I got to figure this out. I was looking into the spirit meaning of owls, the mythological meaning of owls. I would ask people about owls. After that event, I was having so many synchronistic events involving owls. I saw owls all the time. People around me noticed it. And it was like out of hand for a few years. And this was going on in my life when I first started looking into this. So I stepped into this with owls and UFOs co-joined in my mind and in the way I addressed it. And so I've said this before where in between 2006 with the event with Kristen and probably right up to about 2013, which is 10 years ago, I spent, I don't think I'm exaggerating, I spent 95% of my waking hours wondering if I had gone insane. Just the synchronicities were unrelenting, and the synchronicities all seemed to be tied into either UFOs or owls. And I would have a weird synchronicity with someone and some person, and then I would like contact that person and then find out that they had UFO contact experiences. It was out of hand. And I was archiving all this stuff in real time. Not all of it, but much of it I was archiving real time on the blog. So Kristen knew me in those years. Like, no joke, 95% of my waking hours, I wondered if I had gone insane. I was not at peace. Ooh, I was a mess. And so I stood, so I stood on the stage, and Kristen knew me pretty well at that point, and I asked her in the audience, like, hey, how's that ring? Does that ring true, Kristen? She was a little annoyed that I was picking her out of the crowd, and I didn't bother me at all, but I was happy to. So Kristen, is this accurate? You knew me then. And she would go, oh yeah, that's accurate. So there comes with this, and so forgive me, I held the floor here for a long time, but there comes a point when these experiences are outside the bounds of what we're told is allowed to happen, right? So my junior high school science teacher defined reality one way. My parents defined reality a certain way. Society defined reality a certain way. All of a sudden, I was thrust into this new realm where reality was not normal. And it was distressing, and things that society said could not happen, they were happening. And like some part of me cracked and broke and crumbled. And then I had to rebuild myself anew. I call it a death and rebirth experience. I've had a bunch of those. I think any thoughtful person goes through a bunch of life experiences that could be called death and rebirth. But this one, so some old part of me died, some new part of me had to be reborn. And it is that new part that has been so dedicated, and I'll say obsessed with this work. And then let me say one more thing, is that the owl thing, like I don't want to cling. Initially, I was clinging to the owl thing. Like I was clinging to the owl thing because that was a thread I could pull on, right? So the totality of the UFO subject is enormous. It just goes from government conspiracies to, people channeling, to psychic experiences, to missing time experiences, to levels of paranoia. So there's this great big giant bottomless pit of data. But I wasn't looking at that. I was looking at the owl. I was pulling on the thinnest thread, the thinnest little sliver, the tiniest fractal of this huge thing. That's all I was pulling on. And it proved to be so rewarding. Like it gave me what I was hungry for. I was hungry as a little kid. I loved like the Twilight Zone. I loved campfire stories. I loved that elusive kind of mystery. And the owl provided me with something that I loved. So I could pull on that thread. It was so fruitful. Collecting these stories was so calming to me to know that I wasn't alone, and then I could then share that with other people. I think I'll leave it there. There, I went on, I held the floor for a long time. Thank you.
No, thank you. I love to hear long accounts from experiencers and what you're talking about, experiences as like an initiatory event where we get cracked open and life is different on the other side. It's like before and after these events, and the terror and the real difficulty, the thinking that you're insane. And for me, that was such a somatic experience of feeling insane, feeling my body panicking and like I had no ground and dizzy and nowhere to land and wondering, it just felt very groundless, nowhere to set anything down. And looking back, that experience now, I treasure it. I really treasure that initiation, but it does break you open, and it did break me open. And I also think of like, why owls? Why you? It seems like there are people who get kind of activated and positioned in certain ways around a very small part of the phenomenon, and then become kind of a beacon for other people to be able to share experiences. I mean, I've seen owls. Only, kind of after the initiation phase have I had a couple of experiences with owls where I kind of wondered, like, I had two right outside my dome one night, and they were calling to each other, and I went outside and just saw their big, they were big. I think they're barn owls here, so they're, really big and really silent. And it was eerie, like you said, because they fly so silently. But I don't think I think if I would have come across your blog, I don't think I would have had that particular experience. So it's not like everybody with a UFO experience has an owl experience.
Oh, absolutely correct. I need to make that clear. Yes, it is certainly not 100%, but it is enough that there's a very real pattern. There's a very real pattern, and you are like the owl guy. I am. Yeah. It's like, yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Oh, it's fine. It's better. Yeah. It's like it's true. So it's a friend of mine from New York City, he worked for the Wall Street Journal and stuff like that. He's kind of he's like pretty smart guy. And so if a friend of his at the bar that he hung out at, like found out that he was like, what? You know the owl guy? You know the owl guy? And this is like, we were like hung out in the dorm together back in 1981 or something like that. So he just it was really funny for him to like find me and say like, oh yeah, like I found one of your fans out there. So, so I've been very, very public talking about this owl thing. Now what I started to say, and I got a little off track, which is totally normal for me, is that like I said, I wasn't like, I was initially clinging to the owl thing. And then what I found as I started collecting letters, right? So once I started putting this stuff online and putting it on the blog, so suddenly, like according to the Google algorithms, like owls, UFO, I was connected, right? So if anyone anywhere in the world had an experience with an owl and a UFO, I was about 2 mouse clicks away from them finding me. And then they would share their story with me. Right at the top of my blog, I say, I want to hear your story. And at the top of my website. And so what I found is these other stories were emerging, and I should be able to do this. I think it's 6 things. Okay, so it's owls, certainly are connected somehow to the UFOs are certainly connected to the owl thing. And then powerful synchronicities are connected to owls, seemingly. And then meditation. I started collecting a lot of stories of people meditating, often meditating, having an intention, closing their eyes, opening their eyes, and there's an owl like right in front of them, oftentimes close right in front of them. And then shamanic initiation. Within the culture of shamans, which exists, we're like living in this Western society, so the shamanism is kind of hidden in our society. It's much more open in other societies. But within those societies, in those cultures, those communities, it is well understood that the owl shows up at the time of shamanic initiation. And then owls and death. Death is all across the board. all across the world's cultures, all across the world's folklore, owls are associated with death. And this is what the folklore is pretty dark. The folklore is pretty eerie. And it shows up in Shakespeare, right? So in Macbeth, what the nightbird doth shriek, and then that predicts Macbeth's death at the final scene. So the implication in the folklore is that owls come and make themselves known before death, but that's not what I'm finding in the lore. What I'm finding is just the opposite, is that owls show up after a death, most often the death of a parent. So I'll tell this is short. So Guy, his father, dies in the hospital, massive heart attack, dead instantly. He's there at the hospital when he's pronounced dead. So when he leaves the hospital, walks out, the little mechanical doors slide open. He steps onto the sidewalk in the dark at night, and alongside on the grass right next to the sidewalk, is an owl looking up at him. And he walks up to the owl and says, "Dad, I love you. You were a great father. Thank you so much. I miss you. It's good to know you're in a better place." I have that story over and over and over again, where people talk to the owl as if it is their dead, usually parent, but though I have other examples too, as if it's their dead, if the loved one who has just passed. It's very common. So there's these list of other things that I call highly charged human experiences, or highly charged human events. And so these experiences, UFO contact is just one of these experiences, along with meditation, psychedelics. Oh, psychedelics is the one I didn't say. People taking psychedelics, most often mushrooms. We'll see owls in a ritual setting. And so these, meditation, psychedelics, shamanic initiation, death, these are in a short list that includes UFO contact. So it's not the owl that is connected to the UFO contact. The owl is connected to these highly charged human events, of which UFO contact is just one. That felt important to say, because I feel like people can get, I understand because I do it too, but people can get very myopic as how they try to frame my research, where as the years go on, I'm much more open, and I feel like I've done a good job at taking a few steps back, and I'm much more comfortable in that place, having a wider view.
Yeah, I'm really curious about how you frame this all in a meta way. Because for me, death and UFOs are extremely connected. And that can be the death and rebirth that we were talking about, the initiation into this other world, and where you were broken down and you come out on the other side. When I went through this, I had to change the way that I saw life and turn it into a story.
You finished my
sentence. Or
a
metaphor.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm curious as to, right, like how you meta frame this so that you can move through the world and not feel crazy and have it make some bigger sense than the randomness.
So when you said that, you paused for a moment, and I finished your sentence in my mind. And I said, well, if I was answering this, I would say I frame it as a story. And then you said it. So yes, I frame it as a story. Someone asked me at a UFO conference, how's things going for you? And I'm like, well, it's kind of been like, since you started this research, how has it changed your life? And I had to think for a second. Well, that's a really good question. This was early on in my struggles, I guess. And I said, I now live in a magical universe, which is true. And actually, I'll say this, we all live in a magical universe. A lot of us don't recognize it, or wouldn't say it that way, but I do, and have, and it helps me. So I frame it as there's dream language. The symbolism of the dream seems to be playing out around us all the time. And I love looking at reality, analyzing reality as if I was a Jungian analyst analyzing a dream. Really has helped. I stole that line from a guy named Christopher Knowles, but things well up in symbolic ways in real life. And the owl is a perfect example of something that's symbolic, steeped in mythology, steeped in archetypal lore, and how it shows up in our lives is it's up to us to, like, it's one thing if an event happens, but if it's another thing to have the event happen and really recognize it. And as silly as it sounds, like I was writing on the blog, and that was a great place to be formal about these life events, because then I could write it down, I could tell a little story. Blogs posts are nice, right? Because they can't be too long. So I had to be kind of succinct and kind of get to the point, and that was really helpful for me in those early years. That I was writing so compulsively about the events that were happening around me. So your question is what's the meta question? Why owls? I actually tried to answer that in a book. Can I read it right aloud from you? Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, okay.
Yes.
This is actually something that I've done this before, and it's easier for me to read it than it is for me to try to do it off the cuff. Okay, so the question: why owls? Here are 4 ideas on what owls might mean, each of which are followed up with another question. So these are not answers. These are just like a form of my speculation. Like I'm speculating in a kind of formal way, but there's no answers here. Number 1, owls are alarm clocks. The simplest answer would be they are here to wake us up. But to wake us up to what? Number 2, owls are an archetype. They are a symbol, an image stored within humanity's genetic memory bank. It's as if there are hidden meanings locked away within our grand shared consciousness, and the owl is the key. We think in symbols, and the owl is touching us on that level. And this deeper knowledge goes back to the dawn of man. But what is the hidden archetypal meaning? Owls are here to announce initiation. An initiation is a ritual, like a young Catholic receiving the Eucharist during their first Holy Communion. Owls often seem to show up just before the arrival of a UFO, as if to announce an impending ritual. Religious scholars would argue that initiation rites are metaphoric of a profound change within the initiate. But the true believer would not see the initiation as a metaphor. The change would be entirely real. But an initiation into what? Number 4, owls are a totem of the transformational experience. Seeing a UFO can transform someone. I've spoken to a lot of people who have seen strange craft in the night sky, and in that moment, their entire definition of reality is altered. I've also spoken to people who have had owl sightings at such highly charged moments that it transforms their lives. But a transformation into what? There, that was helpful just to read that rather than to try to wing it.
Yeah, thank you. And I couldn't help, I know you talked about UFOs at the end, but as you were reading through those different possibilities of why owls, I felt like UFO could have been, the word UFO could have been substituted for owl in all of that. An initiatory experience, an archetypal.
Oh my word! I can't tell you how many times.
Symbol.
Yeah. I addressed that in the story where they get mixed up. They totally get mixed up in my mind. Like I forget. I even typed the wrong OWL and UFO. Both have 3 letters, and I've mistyped them 10 million times. Where I'm typing one where I mean to say the other. I'll probably do it before we're done talking here. I'll flub and I'll say owl when I meant to say UFO, and vice versa.
You'll switch them. Wow. So have you had dry spells? Like after this intense initiatory experience with all these synchronicities and feeling like you were crazy for so long and kind of coming to terms with it, maybe coming out the other side of the initiation, did it dramatically go down, like events and sightings and synchronicities, or has it been pretty steady for you?
Well, I mean, I mean, the UFO stuff certainly goes dormant for a long time. The owl stuff doesn't seem to. And I see, an owl T-shirt or an owl lunchbox is just as vital as seeing a real owl. I try not to weight one more than the other, right? An owl lunchbox is a symbol of an owl. It's not a real owl. But I try my very best to weight them. And I also try to weight UFOs and owls. Like I try not to say one story is more important than the other. But what was your question?
I just wonder if you go through periods where you are not where the world feels less magical, like there aren't a lot of synchronicities or contact with that less magical place. Yeah.
It ebbs and flows, but surprisingly, over the last few years, I've been in kind of it's been pretty nonstop. I mean, and I'll tell you, so the fiction book was out of hand. The stuff that just rained down, the synchronicities that just kind of floated around that, So the creative process, I'm convinced, is tied into this too. And when I was working for the outdoor school, when I would go in the field and work with the students, it was often a month at a time. I mean, I would see wildlife, and I saw a handful of owls when I was working out there, very few. But I was so focused on this one thing. I really gave myself over and lived in the moment. And then oftentimes it was really funny. I would get back, and then it would just start again. So that was interesting. Where I was in this magical place, I was deep in the wilderness of either Alaska or the British Columbia or the Rocky Mountains, and then I would, that place that should feel magical and is actually quite magical, but I would not have the experiences that make up the bulk of my books and my research and the stories I tell. Almost none of, I can actually say zero, took place in the backcountry with students, except that was a big part of my life, and then it happened when I got back. So I just think it was my mindset. I was giving myself over and focused on the team experience in the backcountry.
Yeah. And you mentioned your new fiction book, The Unseen. And I will say, too, before I forget to say this, like, you're known as the owl guy, but you're also known as the synchronicity guy. And when I started connecting with you and talking to you, there would be like this little synchronicity swirl that would happen for a while before and after. It seemed to be centered around you. It just did. I don't know.
Oh, I know. You're right. Yeah. Oh, what happened recently?
At the Archives conference, at the Archives of the Impossible conference in Houston.
Like like at Rice College with the mascot of the owl, and there's owls everywhere on the campus.
Oh, yeah, right. Yeah.
But that's not a synchronicity. That's just like a little set piece, I guess. Yeah.
That's just for fun, yeah. Right? Yeah, that's just for fun. No, you texted me, and because we were talking about your book, and you were talking about a few people who had read it ahead of its publication, and you said there are a few people at the conference. There's out of 8 people or whatever, 5 people are there. And right when you texted me and you listed the names, I looked around and I was sitting at the table with 2 of them. And every time that I communicate with you, it's like that. It's like just a little flurry of synchronicity, and then it dissolves away after a while. So you're the owl guy and the synchronicity guy.
I think I scare people.
Oh yeah, it's not. It's like either you're down for the wild ride, or I'm sure some people are like, no, thank you. Like I don't want to go on that wild ride.
So here's the story. So a fellow was going to do it. His name is Juan. He was going to do a podcast with oh my God, to tell the story correctly, it takes 5 minutes. I won't tell the whole thing, but so crazy synchronicity when he got a hold of me. Like totally laughable. He gets a hold of me and texts me and he says, "Hey, I want you to be on my podcast." I'm like, "Great, yeah, so great." So we set up a date, and the night before, he knew he was going to be interviewing me. It's like he's talking to his wife, and his little kid is there. His kid's like 8, and he's in the backyard, and he says, "I'm going to interview the owl guy tomorrow. Maybe we'll see an owl tonight." And he's like, "Maybe," looking around like, "Maybe we're going to see an owl." And all of a sudden, his son goes, "Dad, look!" And an translucent orange orb floats through the backyard.
Oh my God.
That kind of, so there's one where owl and UFO does get mixed up. He wants to see an owl and sees a UFO instead, or a floating orb, which by definition is an unidentified flying object. But I have that story 50 different ways connected to doing the podcast, where the host or someone directly before or directly after will have some powerful synchronistic event involving that one involved a floating orb, but it was tied into the owl totally. So
right. It's tied into the three of you to talking about Mike, talking about owls, and then the orb floats through.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the really good synchronicities are tough to untangle. Like they're almost like, wait a minute, did this happen first? How did this? Yeah, so that's, and I think the synchronicities are meant to baffle us in a way, to leave us perplexed, to leave us off balance a little bit.
Yeah, I used to think that they were, I think I tried to put them into a box where I was like, this is a confirmation that I'm on the right track, these synchronicities. And especially, I had them all the time when I was on the big island of Hawaii. I lived there for almost 2 years, and it was so nonstop. And I tried to make it mean that I was on the right track, and I just clearly was not. Like my whole life was in shambles. Everything was falling apart. And so that's where I've landed as well. That they're to baffle me, not to be like, you keep going, you got this. It's something else. It's something else.
When I was back around 2009 or so, when I was in the throes of all the owl synchronicities, it was too much. I was seeing owls everywhere. And I went into the forest. There's a little spot, this trail near where I was living in Idaho. And I went there alone. And I stood alone in the forest and I said aloud, which tells you where I'm at as far as my headspace. And I basically praying, I said, okay, like, nuh-uh, I'm not going to pay attention to owls anymore if they're like off on a fence post or like if they're way out there on the telephone line. Like those owls don't count. I'm not going to pay attention to those owls. It's like, if you want my attention, I want that owl to cross my path. I want it to be undeniable that the owl is crossing my path. And so I am not going to pay attention to owls way off on on a telephone line on the other side of the field. And I think it was a day and a half later, so less than 48 hours later, I was riding my bike through this little town of Driggs, Idaho, and it's sunset, and there's like a little hill, so I'm coasting downhill, and I look, and there's an owl on a tree on the right side of the road, and then it just floats off, floats right in front of my eyes. If I had leaned forward on the bike, it feels like its wings would have touched my eyes, and then it like flew right back up and landed on another tree on the other side of the road. It could not have been more. I mean, it could not. Exactly at eye level, right in front of me.
Yeah, that reminds me so much of me sitting in my living room when I lived in Grand Junction, Colorado, saying to the sky, just show yourself. Like, I'm so done with this cryptic bullshit. I can't do this anymore. I can't sleep. I'm haunted. Just show yourself. And at that moment, I had a window that was kind of high up and to my left. And at that moment, something big and white flashed across that window and then slammed into the side of my house. And I jumped up and went out onto the balcony and watched as this big white bird flew away. And I was like, what the fuck was that? As if in response to my, calling out.
Do you know what kind of bird it was?
I don't know what kind of bird it was. It was one of 3 of a series of bird events. But what happened immediately after that is my cell phone rang, and I was working from home. So I went in and I was discombobulated, and I picked it up, and it was just this weird electronic, garbled, techie sort of sound that had been ringing in my ears, for months prior to that as I was falling asleep, only it was really, really loud and turned up. So that was one of my 3 series of bird events in response to me going, I'm not going to do this bullshit anymore. It's going to just show yourself. What is this? And of course, it didn't show it didn't answer any questions, right? It was just a dramatic response to my plea.
Well, in a good story, what do you want? Do you want like do you want the Gandalf to like open the door and like enter and then very carefully in his English accent, explain exactly the workings of reality? I mean, what fun is that, So
depends on the day, right? Some days
it'd be nice, yeah. So, but I know what you're saying. Whatever's going on, it doesn't seem to want to work that way. And I think that people, you could turn the clock back, somebody must have been frustrated about their role in humanity, like back in the caveman days, and probably went out and stood at the entrance to their cave and pleaded to the sky, and then had a similar powerful experience where a white bird slammed into something, or there was a profound noise, and then So I think what the experience you had, I feel strongly, I can't say I know, but I do feel strongly that people have been having that experience all throughout human history. And so what's happening now has a long lineage of people before us who have also struggled with these big questions.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. It was something I found again unexpectedly on the other side of the initiation experience was, this is just part of being human that we've sort of collectively seemingly forgotten about, but this is very deeply human stuff and does seem to have been going on for a really long time. And the kind of magical universe that you were talking about seems like closer to what it means to be human than the sort of dead feeling world that was before the initiatory experience.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that when people contact me, like I'm not a clinician. People contact me and I talk to people on the phone. I reply to a lot of emails, and oh my God, I'm getting flooded with so many things right now. There's some algorithm is bringing up some YouTube interview that I did, and wow, is it triggering a lot of people reaching out to me. But it and I can't get back to all of them, and it breaks my heart, and I wish I could, and I just can't. But the people reaching out to me will tell a story, and then they'll basically say, like, I can't tell my husband this story. I can't tell my wife this story. I can't tell my boss this story. But I'm telling you. And then they'll tell a story that involves an owl. Sometimes there's no UFO in it, and it's a mystical owl story. I've got thousands of them at this point. And then they'll say, have you ever heard of any stories like this? Oftentimes I haven't heard that exact story, but what I can answer is, I have not heard that exact story, but I have heard many, many others with the same flavor and mood. So there's this kind of flavor and mood and this mystique and this aura that surrounds these stories that are just beyond our reach to truly understand. And for people to find out that they are not alone is an enormous form of solace. So I can provide that. I'm not a clinician. I can't play a therapist, but I can let people know that they're not alone.
Yeah, which is huge. I mean, that for me was, again, transformational. It's like, I'm not the only one who's gone through this. And the people on the other side that I've come in contact with are really smart, kind, interesting, lovely people. It's a good group to land in on the other side of this stuff.
Yeah. So I was in a great group when I was dealing with all the outdoor work. I was dealing with all that outdoor work, and I was in a great, amazing community. And then partially I just was getting older. Like all of a sudden I wasn't in my 30s anymore. So carrying a big backpack through mountain ranges in Alaska was physically not that easy anymore. And so that chapter of my life ended, and this new chapter of my life just emerged full force.
So one of the reasons that you reached out to me, or it seemed that way when we had our very first conversation, was that you'd had an experience in Utah, and my memory is that you had then a regression around that experience, and that was very powerful and very emotionally overwhelming. And you shared that with me, which, again, helped kind of validate my own experiences, some in regression and some in dreams. So I'm curious about that experience and where you land with that. So I guess you kind of have to tell that part of the story to answer the question about where you land with it.
So the experience so when I drove, there was an event happened in southern Utah. It was between Beaver, Utah and Cedar City, Utah. And I slept outside on the side of the road, which I do all the time. So I feel like pretty darn comfortable sleeping outside. And when I travel around the West, it's interesting. In the East, it's not as easy. People can't pull this off. But I mean, just like to have a sleeping bag in the back of your Subaru is all you need, right? You just sleep out under the stars. And that's so. I was coming back from a UFO conference in 2009, and I knew where I was going to stay. I was going to be sleeping at this one spot, and I. Oh wow! So this event turned out to be my confirmation event, and to tell this story completely would eat up a lot of time. So, but I'll try to zip through some parts, and the reason I reached out to you was because when you spoke with Stuart Davis on Artists and Aliens, that podcast series that he did, you had an event that implied that you had this kind of, I can't now I'm searching and trying to remember where it felt like you had. It felt like, it's hard to know these things, it felt like you had a previous incarnation in some other realm, some other place, and that you were living this life now and had a role to play here. Is that fair to say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's one of the hardest things for me to wrap my head around with any, seriousness. It was really, really hard to digest and integrate. Yeah. And so when you told me that was part of like the ontological shock of having you talk to me that day, it was just like, holy fuck, really?
Oh, it's so funny. I do that to people. Yeah. But so 2009, sleeping on the side of the road, beautiful night, coming back from a UFO conference, and I wake up. This is sort of just a little pull out. This is so weird. To tell these stories correctly, it just goes on and on and on. When I pulled in, there was a car in front of me. It was a white Jeep, and it had Wyoming plates, and the Wyoming license plate have a little number. The first two digits are a number. It was 10, and then it had the rest of the number. The number is the county in Wyoming. 10 is Fremont County. So someone in southern Utah camped on the side of the road in a white Jeep from Fremont County. I was like, they work for the school that I work for. I know where they work for. I was like, I could have like knocked on the window, and I am certain I would have known them. I could see people in the Jeep with a headlamp on. And I was like, I know these people. I'm sure I know these people. I have tried and tried and tried. I've asked around the town and the people that I work with, they're like, who has got the white Jeep? And like, I've had some leads, but I have not been able to figure it out. But I'm convinced I know the people in that car. So I pull into this turnout. There's a little spot where someone's camping, sleeping in their car. I didn't want to shine my lights on them, so I back right out and I drive to the furthest end. It's not like a campground. It's just like there's some old crappy fire rings and stuff like that. So I go to the far end. I pull my sleeping bag out. I set it out down on the ground, and I fall asleep under the stars. And I wake up later, and this is in a very remote part of southern Utah. And I woke up at some point in the middle of the night, and I look up at this hilltop. And I look at this, and I say and there's something up on the top of the hilltop, and I say to myself, that looks just like a landed flying saucer. And I kind of look at it, and I was like, kind of going to UFO conferences, and I had my blog, and I was having I felt I was a vegetarian. I was pretty groovy at that point. And I was like, if there was a flying saucer on that hilltop, I would know it. I would feel some internal knowing. It would be emanating kind of UFO vibes, and I would be able to pick up on it. I looked at this thing, I felt nothing, and I rolled over and went to sleep. And I woke up later, and there was a coyote howling right next to seemingly right next to my head. Like, I've slept out a lot in the mountains and in the Southwest, and I've heard a lot of coyotes. I have never, ever, ever in my life heard one that close. Like, I sat up and I was like, why can't I see this thing? I'm just in the sagebrush, and there's some juniper bushes, and I'm like, this thing's like right here. Like it felt like if I had a dog bone, I could have just and it could have caught it, and I was like, oh my God. And I looked at the big house on the hilltop. I called it was a round house. It was like a round building. It was black, or it seemed to be black. It could have been a water tower. It's like, it could be a water tower. Why anyone? So anyway, it had little dots of light, like ping, 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 ping along the circumference of this round structure. So there's this, this coyote howling and the round thing is still there on the hill. So I went back to sleep and I woke up a third time and there was a bright light behind the bush right at my feet. So this juniper bush. And I sat up and I did the thing where you kind of move your head from side to side. Like, there's something there. Something's over there. And it didn't look like a flashlight, didn't look like a car headlight, didn't look like someone left their car door open in a dome. So I was figuring, someone just pulled off and just, do exactly what I'm doing. They're just sleeping out here for one night. And so the next morning, I got up and when it was still dark and I walked around out on the other side of the bush and there was nothing. There was no place for anyone to park out there. There was no place for a car to pull off and I don't know what was. So, and then the next morning when I did wake up and I just tossed everything in the back of the pickup, the back of my Subaru and started driving home. And interesting, I did not remember. I don't have any memory of if there was that round structure was still on the hill. So I get home. So from that part of southern Utah to my house in Idaho, I left at like 5 in the morning. So I got a lot of driving done. So I was around lunchtime, I was back home and I get to my house. The very first thing I did is I sat down on Google Maps and I looked up to see if I could find out what that round structure on the hill was. There was nothing there. I've since been back to the site many times. There's nothing there on that hilltop. And I made a picture of it and I kind of did a blog post on it, which I'm glad I did. The picture's pretty accurate but it shows that round structure and I kind of got all wiggy with maps and I was like, okay, if I was sleeping here and this thing was there and then it was not that day, it was the next day. I was at my desk and I remember exactly, I was standing next to my desk and then I just had this like flash in my mind, just like click, click. Like I had this hyper vivid psychic knowing and I saw a visual of a map of southern Utah and it had 3 push pins in it, 3 points noted on a straight line. And I was like, oh, well, I know what the one thing on the end of the straight line is. The thing on the westernmost side is what happened the night before last. That's where I was sleeping out. So I sat down and I kind of made this map up and I was like, and I know what's on the other end of the map. That's this thing that happened in Dolores, Colorado in 2010. And I could tell that story. It would take a while, but oh my word, it sure sounds like UFO contact. I got basically levitated out of a tent and woke up in the morning with a big scratch on my body. And then weirdly enough, that same day, I did a sweat lodge ceremony with a Navajo, I want to say shaman, that would be incorrect, a Navajo tribal member in Canyon de Chelly, which is this magical place in Arizona. So that was on the easternmost spot on the line, right? So you hold a piece of thread and you pull it really tight, right? And that between 2 points, it's always going to be a straight line. But there was a third thing, and it was right along that line. I was like, oh, that was the thing that happened on the Burr Trail Road. There's this road in southern Utah called the Burr Trail Road. It connects, I think it connects Boulder, Colorado Boulder, Utah to a place in Colorado. It's a beautiful, primitive road. And so I camped back there for one night with a friend of mine. Her name is Natasha. And I was listening to an owl as she saw an orb floating. And I'll tell you what, that owl was the loudest owl I've ever heard. And it was right next to my head and I couldn't see it. And that sounds exactly like the coyote. Like, exactly. So I made a little map. That's what I do. I do a lot of outdoor work. I started making my own maps around then. It was really easy. There was some simple tech, just Google Maps. So I make this map and these 3 items line up exactly razor sharp together. And I'm like, okay, every doubt is over. No, this like what just happened is an event that is beyond coincidence. It is so clearly orchestrated, and it was orchestrated in a way that only I could decipher the clues, right? I make maps, I sleep outside, I love the owls, I love the coyotes, I love a sweat lodge ceremony, and all these things are just like, they're just so palpable to me. And then and I was like, okay, this was orchestrated for me and me alone, and every doubt is gone. What happened was I didn't quite realize it, but I had been living with a tape loop in my head that had been grinding away. This can't happen. This can't happen. This can't be true. It can't be happening. It's not happening to you. You're not special. This isn't happening to you. And that just got pulled out and never turned back on. And my life got so much calmer without that grinding tape loop. This can't be happening. This can't be true. And I was just like, okay, it is happening. It is true. It did not necessarily make my life easier, but I was a much calmer person because of it. I mean, so I don't know what the source of this stuff is, but I know it's real. That was in 2013. In 2018, I was in California. I was giving a talk on ultralight camping at a college, and I said, "Well, I'm there. I'm gonna get a hold of Yvonne Smith. She's a hypnotherapist who lives in Pasadena, or she has an office in Pasadena." And so I made an appointment, and I'd met her a few times at UFO conferences. And so this is typical. So typical. So I email her like a couple months in advance. Say, like, Yvonne, we've met at conferences. I would like to have a hypnosis session with you. She gets back to me in the next email. She said, "Mike, what a nice surprise. I just started reading your book this evening." So that kind of stuff is absolutely normal to me at this point. So I go to the hypnotherapy session. I want to talk about the one night with a round structure on the hill. And the reason I want to talk about that is there was no fear associated with it. It was a wonderful night. It was pleasant. It was a coyote howling. It was a beautiful spot. So she's like, great. So she takes, we talk for a little bit, you say, what do you want to cover? How do you want to address this? And I said, hey, I don't understand what hypnosis is, but when I'm under in this vulnerable place as far as being hypnotized, I don't understand what it is. You're tapping into something, my subconscious, whatever that might mean. Can you ask me what's up with the owls? She goes, of course, sure. So we go through this session, and this, okay, now let me, before I start this, I got to be really clear. I don't believe this literally. Like, I don't believe it literally. I had a wonderful, powerful, wildly emotional cinematic experience, but I don't know what the reality is. And I know enough about myself as I'll make myself crazy if I try to answer that question. Did this happen? So I got to take 2 steps back and just be at peace with, hey, what an interesting story. So she starts talking with me, and she takes me back. She goes through the induction, and I'm there on the side of the road in, where the car was parked in that turnoff. And I'm saying things like, well, I'm lying here. I got my pillow. I got my sleeping bag. My car's right there. It's a pretty night. It's cold. She goes, okay, what else happens? And I struggle a little bit. And then all of a sudden I go, it's them. It's them. I know it's them. And I'm talking about the bright light behind the bush. And I'm like, it's them. There's a light behind the bush, and I know it's them. And the next thing I say is, I'm looking down at this big round thing. I'm like above this big round thing. It's got a ring of lights around the outside of it. And I'm looking down at this is a big structure on the hill. I'm looking down at it. I'm above it. And I think I'm still in the sleeping bag. Yvonne says, Mike, are you out of body? I go, I don't know. I don't know. I'm looking down at this thing, but I think I'm still in the sleeping bag. And the next second, I'm like walking in a hallway. It's like a round, curved hallway, right? So it's like the inside of a curved building, or the implication is I'm inside a flying saucer in a curved hallway that goes around the entire circle of the inside of the flying saucer. That's what it felt like. And the very first thing I notice is I'm not tall. Like, I'm 6 feet tall, and I'm not tall. I'm like short. I look to my right, and I look to my left, and on each side of me are these gray aliens, like with the big bald heads, and I'm the same height. And Yvonne goes, Mike, look down at yourself. So kind of in my mind's eye, look down. And this is all happening in kind of like, I don't have like a linear, like I'm not watching a movie of it. I'm having just like little click, click, little flashes. Like I get a very visual click, click flash of what happened. So I look down at myself, and I've got these long skinny fingers, and I'm wearing like kind of a tight fitting spacesuit. And I got this little itty bitty spindly body and these skinny legs. And I go, I think I'm a gray alien. And she goes, and we talk for a second. I'm like, this feels totally normal. This feels totally normal. I'm a gray alien. It feels totally normal. And we talked for a little bit after it, and it felt like there was a rubber suit. Like, I don't know if this is like this. I can only say this is kind of what it felt like. This is the impression I got. I don't know whether it's true. It felt like there was a rubber suit waiting for me. And I was in my astral form, out of body, and I like hovered over the ship and whoosh, got sucked right into the suit and was walking down the hall. Like there was no skip in time. I was just like, boom. So here I am. And the next thing, and she goes, and Mike like I said, I'm a gray alien. She'd heard it all before. She didn't flinch at all. She said, and Mike, what happens next? And I go, I'm in this conference room. And the conference room is this ugly, like, it had like ugly carpeting, like in a folding tables, plastic folding tables, and like really ugly wallpaper and fluorescent lights. And you know what it felt like? Do you know when you watch like Saturday Night Live, there's what's called a 3-sided set, that real simple 3-sided set. And you're like, it just has 3 walls and the audience is out there. That's all I saw was 3 walls. Like I was seeing it as if it was like a very cheap, low budget 3-wall set. And I'm standing there, and it felt like there were the two beings in the hall were behind me. And I'm facing this plastic folding table. And on the other side of the folding table is probably like I'm going to say between 8 and 12 beings. And they were kind of fuzzed out. I don't really have a visual of them, but they were the gray beings. They were the grays. The gray beings with the big black eyes and the bald heads, all seated at this conference table, or at this plastic folding table. And it felt like I was on trial. And it's funny, and I said there were 2 beings right behind. I never saw them. I've told this story to people who research near-death experiences. And they go, oh, the 2 beings behind you. This is right out of near-death literature. People going into the great beyond, or the gates to heaven, or in the white realm, and there's 2 beings behind them that they can't see. So I'm standing there, I'm facing this table. I feel like I'm on trial. I'm going to go, why am I here? And they say, you volunteered for this. I'm like, what does that mean, I volunteered for this? Well, what am I doing here? Now is the time. What? Now's the time? What does that mean? Why am I here? You volunteered for this. Why am I here? You volunteered for this, and now is the time. And then there was this sort of click. And all of a sudden, I was just flooded with this like emotional like surge. And I was just like, I was just like so emotional and so angry. And I would just spat out like, you never told me. You never told me there would be loneliness. You never told me there would be pain. You never told me it would be this hard being here. You never told me it would be this difficult. Being here would be this hard. And I was swearing at him, and I was so worked up, and I was sobbing. And Yvonne's like, Mike, why are you so emotional? I'm like, they didn't tell me it would be this hard. And like, what do they want? And they're like, they want me to play some role. And they never told me they never told me there was loneliness here. And they never told me there was depression here. They never told me there was pain here. And I am just coming unhinged. The audio, I did the transcription. The audio is torturous to hear me going through this. It's so rough. And I'm just like, this is so fucked up. They don't understand. They like it's like some fucking business deal for them. And I didn't agree to this, and I don't know what I'm doing here. And this is I'm pissed off, and this is fucked up. It just builds and builds and builds. And then there's this like, and you can hear it in the audio. You can hear me just, and I literally go, and I, this is really tough to explain. I'm lying on this couch, like I with like veins bulging out of my forehead, tears running down my face, just straining, wrenched in this form of tension. Like what it felt like, like a pool toy, those floaty pool toys you can like lay on like a mattress and float in the pool. Like think of blowing one up, but you blow it up so hard that you're like almost afraid to touch it. It's like just on the verge of popping. And then someone puts a pin in it and it just deflates. I was silent for almost a minute. I think it's like 45 seconds. I was totally silent on the audio. And I didn't breathe. It felt like my heart stopped. I went from as tense as any human could ever experience to as so calm I wasn't breathing. I know my heart was beating, but it felt like my heart stopped. And after 45 seconds, Yvonne's voice comes in the audio, and I remember this very clearly, and she said, "Mike, what happens next?" And I very calmly say, "I think I'm back in the sleeping bag." And we talked for a little while, and she said, "What did they want?" And I said, "I don't know what they wanted. I don't know." And we talked, and she said, "You can tell me, Mike. You can tell me what they wanted." And I was like, "I really don't know." You know what it felt like? It felt like I was in a spy movie, and I was carrying an envelope. The envelope was sealed, and I was not allowed to open that envelope. And we talked for a little while, and it was pretty obvious that the hypnosis session was winding down. And she goes, "And Mike, what is your connection to owls?" And without skipping a beat, I go, "The owls aren't important." Right? So this is like, I'd been like eating, breathing, sleeping, drinking owls like for a decade. It's all I wanted. Owls, 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 owls. I was researching. I was like collecting. I was talking. I'd already published books about owls. And that was the last thing I would have said, the owls aren't important. I would have said the owls are the most important thing. So I said, and this rolled out, and I'll just do the whole thing. It's like seared into my psyche. "The owls aren't important. I am an artist, and I know how people take in a symbol. The owl is a symbol. The owl is a symbol on a door. The owl is the correct symbol for the door, but the owl is not important. The door is important. We are on this side of the door in this tight, claustrophobic little hallway. And on the other side of the door is an infinite vastness." And I was like, I asked Yvonne, like, where did that come from? We talked afterwards. Like, was I channeling? She said, "How would I know?" Which was a good answer. And so two things happened. I had that powerful experience of being in the conference room as a gray alien. Now, like, I know there's not a tacky conference room with ugly beige carpeting on a flying saucer. So I was presented with some sort of symbolic event. It was dream language. When I talk about this hypnosis session, I will say, well, in the dream, then I have to correct myself. I mean, in the hypnosis session. So I don't believe it literally happened. I believe it is a wonderful story, full of emotion, dark emotions, scary emotions, as any good story should have strong emotional charge to it. And so I was confronted with a story that I take the story seriously, but I don't take it literally. And I need to proceed forward from that place, because I'd make myself crazy if I didn't. And then the second thing is, I had that kind of mystical little poem almost about the owls on a door, which has helped me so much to release I was clinging to the owls. I don't want to be too dramatic, but that was like my life raft, and I'm adrift in the sea of mystery, and I was clinging to the owl life raft, and it allowed me to let go. And it's interesting because afterwards, like I was really calm. Like after the session with Yvonne, I was like, okay, great. Okay, I got it. Yeah, okay. This is like, I remember like I had to like, I was in Los Angeles. I had to drive in traffic. I was like, I remember listening to the radio and like, tapping my fingers on the steering wheel as I was driving. And I was like, this is like this should be traumatic, but it wasn't. So I don't know what if we turn, so that the session in the hypnosis session was about the night of March 10th, 2013. March 10th, 2013 was the night I slept in southern Utah by the big round structure and had the coyote at my head. I came home. I started the book, The Messengers, less than 48 hours after that event. And then years later, I have a hypnosis session where Yvonne says, Mike, what do they want? And I scream, they want me to play some role. And then if you follow the timeline, they say, now is the time. You volunteered for this. And I started writing the book, The Messengers, after that event. Directly after that event. I cannot see it without seeing that part so clearly.
Wow, thank you so much. Thank you for recounting that. It's as powerful and unsettling as it was the first time I heard it. And it makes me, again, I can't help but make the correlation of after the 3 bird events that happened, I started the book the next day. I'd been resisting it for a year or two, writing this book that I really felt like I needed to write, where they told me it would bridge the gap between these 2 parts of my life. And after the third of the 3 white bird events, 24 hours later. And I had kind of started the book like writing a treatise or something, like it was not personal. It was just sort of laying down some facts that I was very removed from. And after that, I just started writing first person. Like this happened and then this happened. And, it totally transformed it. Yeah. And I completely hear you when you say like, that it's a really good story. And you take the story seriously, but you don't take it literally. And I hear that. And I feel that for myself as well, but I also do struggle a little bit with like wanting to know. It sounds like you've landed pretty comfortably in the liminal, like being okay with it staying sort of mysterious and amorphous and being a good story that functions really well in your life, but that doesn't compel you to continually race down these rabbit holes anymore.
Well, I lived in that place where I was searching for some sort of answer. I was desperate. And that was the time when I said, I felt like I was going insane. And I knew how unhealthy that was. You know what I've said, and I've said this is presently, I am not allowed to be astonished. I am allowed to be in awe, but not astonished. Astonishment, you're like your adrenaline, you're like, it's not a healthy place to be astonished all the time. But awe, being in awe, is a different emotion altogether. So I feel like that's been really helpful. Like I really formally said, okay, I can no longer let myself be astonished, but I do recognize the mythic quality to these experiences, the story quality, the dream quality to them.
Speaking of that, I do want to talk about your book, and I want you to talk about writing the book, The Unseen, your first fiction book, in as much fullness as you would like to talk about it. You gave it to me to read before it was published, and I'm not yet, I'm not in the awe camp. I'm still astonished a lot, and which I think I would call maybe I think I'd call it like ontological shock. Mm-hmm. Is the body reaction to that, the body going into having adrenaline and feeling unmoored and not sure where reality fits in. And I had that experience reading your book.
What the experience of?
Ontological shock
from
and
reading
astonishment. Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. It was, I sat down to read it like the first night, and I read, I don't know, the first quarter of it or something. And then the next day I just read through the entire thing. I think I finished it in a day or maybe 2 days. And I had to go for a walk. I had to like put it down, go be in nature, put my feet on the ground. And it gave me all the same, it gave me a feeling of ontological shock, which is why I found it so powerful, because because the body doesn't lie. I don't think the body lies. And when my body does that, I take it seriously. It's like there's something here that is reality bending. And, there's lots of reasons that could have happened to me with your book. Part of it is the landscape where it happens, which is so deeply in my soul, the American Southwest. And I could really easily picture it. I don't know. It was like you took all of the experiences or all of the hallmarks of being an experiencer and put them into a book in a skillful enough way that it translates, like it really did affect me.
Wow. Okay. So the story is of a character. His name is John, who is, anyone who knows me, I am John. It's me. There's some stuff John says there that's totally me. And so John kind of is the story originally started as a comic book. I wanted to do it as a comic book, and I realized it would just be way too much work. And I put it on, I was like, okay, I got a shelf. I can't do it as a comic book. And I put it on a shelf. Metaphorically, it was just a document on my computer. And then 8 years later, I pulled it out and looked at it. So I started this back around 2010. And then in around 2018, I pulled it out again, and I tried to work on it for one summer. So what I had written, like a nice treatment, like the outline of the story, and wow, a lot changed, in actual reworking it and actually writing it. But the general form was there. So the character John, the artist, is kind of a disillusioned artist. He's kind of got it's a little bit unclear whether he's depressed or he's got kind of like a creative block, and he just turns his back on. He basically walks out at his back door and starts walking and doesn't turn around. And he goes on this kind of, the people who read it, didn't know where it was going. And I was like, where's this guy just going to be walking in the desert? It's a big, thick book. He's just going to walk around the desert for the whole book. And so a couple of people, Joshua Cutchin basically said, Mike, you got to tell people that he's going to get somewhere. So on the back of the book, I've said, he goes on a spiritual walkabout and arrives in a town. So about a quarter of the way through the book, or it's roughly in that range there, he arrives at this town, and then the town becomes the setting for the rest of the book. And the town has got this kind of haunted, mystical, I wanted the town to be really appealing, and that kind of just ooh, what a special place this is, this lost town. And the story of the town is it's right up against the Colorado River, basically the Grand Canyon, a big Colorado River, hard to cross. There's only a few bridges across it. And there used to be a bridge there. The bridge fell a long time ago. I just made that up. But it felt like it could fit. And I've had a few people read it who've spent a lot of time down there. And I was like, did that bother you that I just made up this stuff about the bridge? And oh, no, it was great. Didn't bother me at all. So, okay, good. So, but when he arrives, so a mystery unfolds. There's a woman that read the book, and then she got back to me, and my biggest worry is that John walking alone in the desert would be boring. And I kept on asking people, how's it going? Was the beginning boring? And some people said it was almost boring. It was just on went up to the, and I asked this one woman who's smart, and I said, how was the part where John's walking alone in the desert? And she said, it was a ritual as old as time. I was like, oh, she got it. She got what I was trying to say. And you and I have spoken. I remember what I did to you. When you finished reading the book, you sent me a note. I just finished your book. And I was I replied, call me back right now. I don't know how other authors have the same story, but I poured a decade of my life into that book. And then to have someone say, oh, I just read the book. And there was no way I was going to go, hey, right on. That's awesome. I was like, we got to talk. And I was like, "But how about this? What did this? What did you feel here? How about this part? Did it make sense?" So you read a draft before it was finally published, and I cleaned up there was a lot of tiny things that were kind of insignificant, a lot of punctuation type stuff, but there was a few plot points that I clarified a little bit from feedback from you and a number of other people, Joshua Cutchin included in that list. But I was trying to tell a surface story, kind of a thriller, kind of a, it's not quite Twin Peaks and it's not quite the X-Files, but kind of a mystery thriller. And I will say that it's a UFO book, and I very consciously embarked on this. I never wanted to use the word UFO. I never say UFO. I never say flying saucer. I never say synchronicity. There's owls in it. I say owls plenty, but I tried to just not even include the word in the book. And my goal was, I don't know whether I achieved it, I wanted people to read the whole book and not even know that it was about flying saucers and UFOs and stuff like that, and abduction, things like that. So, whether I achieved that or not, I doubt it, but that was my goal. And so there's kind of a love story that meets up in the town, and there's kind of a mystery, and there's kind of some spies, and there's things build and build and build, and there's a reason that the spies arrive at the town at the same time that the character John arrives in the town. And I tried to, so I did two things. I worked really hard. The reader might have questions, and I worked really hard the answer is in there somewhere else in the book. So if there's some question, well, what happened right then and there? Why did that happen? Somewhere in the book, it's explained. It might be explained in half a sentence, but it's there. So I worked really hard to make sure that every question was answered. It's elusive enough that I feel like the reader will get lost in the ride a little bit. But this book was written in a synchronistic cloud that I almost can't even put in words. And and I'll also say that I don't want to, any writer will tap into this, but there's stuff I wrote and I look back at it afterwards and I was just like, how did I write that? Where did that come from? And I've talked to some writers. Yeah. When you're any good writer, any day, when you're on a good day, that's how it always feels. But wow, it was something new to me. And so this is the first fiction I'd written. And fiction. So there's a quote. Basically, someone said, writing fiction is hard because fiction needs to make sense. Right? So The Messengers was a nonfiction book. I wasn't beholden to come up with any answers. All I had to do was tell a bunch of stories that I'd collected, and I could speculate about things and kind of link things together and compare and contrast stories. And that's not fiction. That was just me. I had a wealth of emails and documentation and letters and people to talk to. So I had, I had source material to work from. This book was, wow. So here, I'll tell one story. This is going to be, I'm certain this woman would give me permission to use her name, but for now, I'm just going to choose not to. There was a point in the story where John and his, let's say, the love interest are on a swing set, and these two owls land on the swing set. And there's kind of this magic spell that's being cast, and it builds and builds and builds. And then both John, and this is at night, and both John and the woman blackout. The story is told from John's point of view. So the woman runs off and she's not seen for a few days, but John tries to make sense of this event. And I wrote it. I've read a lot of near-death experience literature. And so I just tapped into that, the near-death thing, and it's the timeless realm. And one of the things that happens when you're in a timeless realm is it shows up in the near-death experience. It also shows up in the UFO experience, where people know everything in the universe. For a little while, I knew everything. I was in this timeless realm. Could have been there 50 years, could have been there 5 minutes. It's beyond time. And I knew everything in the world. So I just I put it in my book. Sure, great, it's out there. I'll just mine the available source material out there, and I'll just squeeze it into this fictional book. But two people had a shared near-death experience. But they didn't really die, so it's not really a near-death experience. And it's a little unclear whether she had the same experience that he did. So it's unclear if they shared it. But I remember I wrote this, and I wrote it at night, and the next day I kind of was going through and rereading it, and I was like, what did I get myself into? This whole story hinges on this experience, and here's this woman and like this guy, and they have this shared near-death experience, and I just made it up, and it sounds utterly ridiculous. It's totally unbelievable. It can't, like, what did I get? I just like painted myself into a corner with the dumbest thing I could have done. I just made up something so unrealistic. And as I'm like, ugh, like, what did I do? Like, just, ugh, like, I just had that kind of like dispirited crash. And I said, oh my God, I'm so tired. I can't keep my eyes open. So I just laid down and went right to sleep. Hour later, wake up. Like, wow, I was out. I was asleep. And I checked my Facebook, and someone says they want to be, I get a Facebook friend request, and there's all kinds of like scams and bots and things like that. So I looked up this, like, who's this woman? I don't know who this woman is, and she wants to be my friend. So I click on her, and she wrote a book about a shared near-death experience where she was doing Reiki on a man she had never met before, and she held his hand in the hospital room. She was all alone in the hospital room. She held his hand and was trying to give healing energy. And then she's whoosh, instantly vaulted out of normal reality and into this timeless realm, a realm of mystical love and unending magnificence. And then there's this guy, he's floating towards the light, and she like basically grabs him and she recognizes him. The man she was holding his hand, she couldn't really see him. He had tubes up his nose and in his mouth. His eyes were taped shut. He'd been in a coma for a long time. So she sees this guy. She recognizes him. She pulls him back from the light. I had this, I don't know, synchronicity isn't the right word for it, like this divinely orchestrated event for me to calm me down. And this woman's story relieved the stress and the doubt I had about including that. The magic of the synchronicity relieved all doubt, and I was like, I can proceed forward. I can charge ahead with the story.
That's so amazing, that divine intervention. And I know that woman because...
I know you do. I was going to say that.
Yeah, because as I was leaving my hotel at Houston and everybody else was getting and decided to drive over to the conference. But I'm in the desert Southwest, and now here I am in Houston, and there's like moisture in the air and there's beautiful trees. And so I decided to walk to the conference. And as I'm walking out of the door to the hotel, that woman pairs up with me and says, "Are you going to the conference?" And then we walk and talk together for, 3 or 4 blocks, and massive synchronicities in our experience as well. And so I know who she is because of that moment. And she was also one of the people that was sitting at the table with me when you texted later in the day.
So I'm certain she would be fine telling her name, but I need to ask her first, but I'll ask her, and I'm sure she'll say yes.
Of course.
But I don't want to. So, but
I should have her on the podcast. Her story is amazing. Like her story is, and she's such a nice person. Yeah.
Oh, and she read the book too. And she was so wonderful. That woman has a niceness that radiates from her that is just so genuine. And she was just like, the book is a tragedy, right? So the book, like right from the first page that it's not going to be a happy ending. But it was really, she got really emotionally pulled into the story, which was what I wanted. The very first word of the book, here, I got the book right here on the desk here. This is the very first, they get that little page there with just 2 sentences or 1 sentence on 1 page. Okay, so I just did a single page. There's 1 sentence on the page. This is how the book begins. The story is fiction, but the emotions are real. And that's what I wanted. That was kind of in the back of my mind the whole time. I'm going to tell an incredible story that is beyond belief, but I want the emotions to feel real to the reader.
That's how I experienced it. You achieved that. And I'm curious about how, did a sequel arrive? Now do you have to write a second fiction book?
What happened is, so in the short term, I'm going to do the audiobook. I'm going to read it as an audiobook. And so I'm going to be going to 2 conferences here next week. And so it'll be until early September before I can really start the audiobook. But, and I want to read that myself. And so the question, is there a sequel? So people asked me that right away. And there was this kind of thing where I was writing it, and I would literally, the editor that I was working with, there was this guy would just have the conversation like, oh, crap, like shit, like, oh, like I can't, like it's like this, everyone's going to want a sequel. And do you know Kelly Chase?
Yeah.
So Kelly Chase read an early version of the book, and she said, well, I know it's like she asked me, is there going to be a sequel? And I'm like, don't ask me that. And she said, oh, this is like asking, a woman like right after she's given birth, you going to have more kids? So I was like, the pain of birth has subsided. And now I'm a proud parent in a way of this book. And I've got a little file going of just ideas. It's like, essentially it's the 3x5 cards and the bulletin board of ideas. I got to switch them around and pull them around. But in the first book, I tried to tell a surface story, like, this is a thriller. And then below that, I tried to tell a deeper story. And that deeper story deals with like mythos and like a mood and a journey of sorts. Kind of a mythic journey and that journey was unfinished. That journey was unfinished in the book. And so I need to finish it. Yeah. So there will be a book 2. Oh my God. I've never said it's highly probable there'll be a book 2 because I've certainly started it.
Yeah. 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 Well, how do you feel about this? Do you feel complete? Is there more that you want to say?
Doing this kind of work has been, like, my life took a remarkable turn after that event in the mountains with Kristen back in 2006. Like, my life had been going along in one way. And that event with the owls and the voice in my head that said this has something to do with UFOs, my life just got derailed. Basically, the train fell off the tracks. And it took a long time to hoist that big, heavy train back on the tracks. But it was when I started moving again, it was a different train. The tracks were going in a different direction. I was a different person. And it has been like, I am more comfortable in this person now that I am than I was in that previous life. Like, I'm more comfortable in my own skin now than I was in at any point in my life. And I'm doing this work that is, by all accounts, out of the bounds of what most folks would consider normal or respectable or appropriate. Like, I'm digging into elusive mysteries, and it has been so rewarding on so many levels. So, like, earlier we sort of started the interview, you're just like, oh yeah, is it okay to call you the owl guy? And I'm like, yeah, I'm totally fine with that. That doesn't bother me at all. But it's so, like, there's this thing where, like, people like get a guru and the guru gives them a new name, right? So, like, this phenomena in essence gave me, it's not really I still have my own name, but I got a nickname, I guess, out of this, and a new lease on life in a way that I never, ever would have expected if, turning the clock back to that frazzled chapter of my life right after, when the first owl event happened in 2006, it just felt like the world came unhinged. I was having so many synchronicities and so many strange experiences. And that has mellowed greatly but I'm much more at peace now. It feels great.
Thank you so much for that. I have a lot of resonance with that, hearing you say that. It was thinking about where I was and who I was before all of this, before it erupted into my external life. It wasn't just on the inside anymore. And where I've landed on the other side of that. Yeah, it's a much richer, more magical landscape. And it was terrifying to cross that threshold, but very, very worth it. So thank you. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Mike Clelland. We ended up talking for another hour or so about a ton of different topics, and that section will be released soon exclusively to patrons. For more information about Mike and his work, visit his website, hiddenexperience.blogspot.com, and go buy his new book, The Unseen. It's such a great read. Special thanks to Morgan Jenks for our musical soundscapes. You can find information about his offerings and support his newest work at morganjenks.com. If you would like to support our work, please consider becoming a patron. You can find us at patreon.com/Robin Lassiter. And finally, to book a one-on-one session with me, where we explore how to move from helpless to helper, from terrified to terrifying. Ooh, what can that mean? Or for a past life or between life regression and more, visit honeyheart.org.